everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Nature has a way of drawing us in. We find solace in its landscapes, refuge in the forests, serene meadows. We find excitement in adventure. But there seems to be something else out there too. Stories of people being inexplicably drawn to nature, as if hypnotized by an unknown force, only to suddenly be faced with the uncertainty of their surroundings. How did they get there, and where are they exactly? Of course, sometimes nature becomes our friend, offering protection from a greater threat, which is why tonight we will explore some of these extraordinary encounters that both endanger and save lives. From the animal kingdom to human nature, all the way to those more mysterious forces that surround us out there. So, let's get started, shall we? Hey there. Love the channel. I heard you read a noodling story the other day and decided to tell my own. I hope y'all like it. This happened about 5 years ago. I was in my 20s and still living in Mississippi. Most folks call it hand fishing there, but I prefer to say noodling. People always act surprised when I wade into the water with the boys, but there's lots of girls who do it. I don't compete or take it too seriously, but I like to go when I get the chance. When I was younger, I ended up with 8 stitches in my hand, and I've been wearing a protective glove ever since. I know noodling sounds a bit extreme, especially when you look at Google images and see how big catfish get, but it's actually pretty safe as long as you take the necessary precautions, which I failed to do on this particular day. It's true that you shouldn't reach into any hole that isn't fully submerged. Your biggest dangers come from things that breathe air. No air, no snapping turtles. But it's also true that you should stay away from the holes that go too deep. If you're wading into waist-deep waters and then crawling halfway inside a 6-foot hole, you could get stuck, and people might not be able to get you out in time. I was noodling with 2 of my cousins, Chris and Brendon, and we hadn't caught anything for over an hour when I found a choice hole just a couple feet deeper into the river. The water was just above, about halfway up my torso, but I went under and reached in for a feel. Sure enough, the hole was occupied with a big mama. They get protective over their eggs, so they'll spin and thrash around with more force than you'd expect. Their mini death rolls can scrape up your arm pretty good if you aren't wearing protection, which I was. Unfortunately, it wasn't my usual gear. Our fishing trip was a last-minute thing, so I had to borrow Brandon's girlfriend's glove. It was loose and a little short on me, so the fish's mouth made it to the exposed skin. It wasn't anything to panic over. People do worse all the time, but I was starting to run out of air, and the fish didn't budge as I tried to pull. It just kept thrashing, and then I realized the glove was stuck on something. When I couldn't immediately withdraw, I began kicking to signal Chris and Brendon. I immediately felt their arms pulling at me, and then there was an incredibly sharp pain just above my wrist as something punctured deep into my skin. I had so many things racing through my mind. There couldn't be any air breathers down there, and whatever got me was definitely inside the fish's mouth. But catfish don't have needle-sharp teeth, so what the hell jabbed me? It went in deep enough that I had to restrain myself from gasping. I was on the verge of running out of breath when the fish finally came free with my arm, and we were pulled to the surface. There was only a brief moment of relief before the pain in my arm intensified. I had a catfish all right, and it was twice as mad as it had been in the hole. My cousins didn't understand why I was screaming, but it took both of them to wrangle that fish and get it off of me. For the most part, when we catch something, the only trophy we're looking for is a good picture. 9 times out of 10, we release the fish with no harm done. Some people, however, are scumbags and release fish with hooks still in their jaws. In this case, it looked like someone couldn't get the hook out, so they cut the end off and called it a day. This wasn't a little hook either. It damaged the ulnar nerve, which apparently runs from your elbow to wrist. Chris called a friend to help him with the catfish while Brendon drove me to the ER. A little fun fact about the ulnar nerve. It's the thing that makes the tingling sensation when you hit your funny bone, and when it's damaged, that sensation is 10 times worse. Mine was particularly nasty. It hurt like hell for weeks, and it was numb for months. It was probably close to a year before I got full sensation back. There was a while at the beginning that I could barely even move my hand. I've been noodling twice since then, but I only use my own gear, and I'm much more cautious about picking my holes. Getting an angry mama with a hook in its jaw was just bad luck, on top of using the wrong glove. But I had no business going into a hole that deep. Yeah, I mean, people can drown in the shallow water too, but I don't know. I did so many things half-assed that day, and now I've paid for it. It took some doing, but for those interested, they were able to liberate the fish and safely return it to its home. They even brought me the hook as a souvenir. So yeah, that's my noodling story. I've had a few experiences, but this one happened not too long ago. I've been going to therapy for quite some time. At this point, I'd been with my current therapist for maybe 2 years. I was making progress and was really impressed with how much she'd been able to help me. She had 2 young kids who would come to her office on days when there was no school. There was a playroom set up across from her office. Usually a nanny would accompany the kids. There was never any disruption to our sessions, even though the children were young. I was almost as impressed by that as I was by her obvious skills. This day, she came in with her 2 kids and started upstairs. A much older woman was between her and her kids. I thought that she must have gotten a new nanny. She told me to come up and we settled in for our session, except I had an overwhelming feeling of sadness. I asked her if she was okay. She told me that she was, but, of course, she would say that because she has boundaries. I was looking past her at the closet with a dark wooden door when the strangest thing happened. The older woman that I'd seen behind her kids sort of materialized into the wood grain and then stepped forward behind my therapist. She put her hand on her shoulder. I asked my therapist if she was okay. She assured me she was. Then the older woman seemed to notice me. She spoke. "Tell her I'm okay." I pretended I didn't hear her. She said louder, "Tell her I'm okay." This time I said, "No." This was all happening not out loud, but telepathically. It's very hard to explain. I guess it's sort of like having your head and your heart working simultaneously. I didn't want to tell her that her dead mother was standing behind her, asking me to give her a really bland message from the beyond. I might have been willing to take a chance had she said, tell her about the time when she was 5 and we went to the beach and had a fish boil, or anything that wasn't so mundane. But I'm okay. I don't know. I asked my therapist one more time, and with greater urgency, "Are you sure you're okay?" This time she said, "Well, I just found out before I came to work that someone close to me died." I thought, yeah, no kidding. I told her I was sorry and that we certainly didn't need to finish the session, since I also knew it was her mother and she probably needed to make some sort of arrangements. Meanwhile, her mother continued to talk to me. Here's the thing. This is my therapist, not a friend, and I really liked her as a therapist. I didn't really want to tell her that I was seeing things. I also didn't want to pass on a message from the beyond. because it seemed like a really big boundary problem. I left. She told me she'd be gone for several weeks. In the ensuing weeks, I was obsessing about the message from her mother. Keep in mind, my therapist never told me who had died. When she came back to work, I scrounged up my courage and told her what had happened. I described what the woman had looked like, what she was wearing, what she said. I told her I knew it was a pretty bland message, but I had to tell her because I couldn't quit hearing it, and I had to say it out loud to her. She looked absolutely astonished. She told me that when her father passed, her mother would say, "I just wish I knew he was okay." It had become something that she obsessed about over the years. The message, "I'm okay," it meant a lot to her and her siblings. Go figure. Once, hiking between trails in McKinleyville, California, I stumbled upon a rural ranch property. My intention was to cut through one trail that would just lead me back to the road where I parked my car originally. However, I'd gotten myself lost. I decided to keep walking in the direction I was headed because I thought I'd heard someone. This being the 90s and no cell phones, I was hopeful that these people would help me find my way. I spotted two young men standing behind a barn-looking structure, smoking what smelled like marijuana. The whole area smelled like marijuana. The older of the two, he made eye contact with me and alerted the smaller boy of my presence. Just as I started in their direction, the smaller one ran to an unknown destination, while the other one told me to get out of there. At the time, I thought maybe they were just being smart kids not talking to a stranger, so I proceeded on my way, assuming I'd likely run into someone else too. The structure the boy stood behind wasn't in shambles. It almost looked as though it was new. I realized as I kept walking that the marijuana smell didn't really subside. And that's when it dawned on me. I was walking through someone's marijuana farm. Someone's illegal marijuana farm. I came upon a house from which I could see the end of the road in a kind of courtyard. There suddenly emerged a very angry older man, and he was wielding a rifle. Behind him, I could see the smaller boy standing inside the home. He'd gone to alert his grandfather, Shirley. Pops is yelling, waving his rifle at me, saying he's going to kill me. He made it clear I was to go back wherever I came from. I pointed to the road. It was just there in sight, but he wasn't having it, so I backtracked a bit. The moment he turned back towards the house, I ran towards a nearby trail, but was spotted as he turned back again. He began to come towards the trail, still carrying that rifle. Now, he was firing shots. I was running up the trail, and as soon as I was out of the line of sight, I jumped down off the trail, hiding under a huge bush, and taking off my sweatshirt, a quite visible red and blue, burying it under me. I could hear the man, but I didn't dare look. Eyes see eyes and all. He turned and headed back toward the house, right in front of the bush. After several minutes, I made the hike back in the direction I'd originally come from, far away from this man's house and those kids. I could swear that on the way back someone was following me. I'm even more sure of it now, knowing how vast those woods are and how highly illegal that shit was at the time. I was lucky to get the hell out of there, but it makes you wonder how many people have gotten themselves into the same mess, and were they so lucky? I was with a new friend from work, walking up to his front door. I'd been there a few times. He unlocks the door and opens it, but pulls off his backpack before we walk in. He's digging inside his bag when I look into the house and I see what looks like a dog. I ask him, "Did you get a dog?" "No." He looks up from his pack and his face drops. We take a couple of steps inside the house and this thing sprints towards us. Like any dog that gets excited when its human has come home. As it got closer, it became immediately clear to me that this was a ghost dog. It looked like a moving pencil drawing in mid-air. There was no temperature change or anything to alert your senses, aside from seeing it. Anyway, like I said, the dog was super excited, running in circles through our legs, jumping up on us, mainly my buddy. We're double and triple checking with each other. You see it? Yeah, it's right here. You see it? I see it. This goes on for at least a couple minutes before the dog leaves out the back door. My buddy at this point is a little distraught. I ask him what's going on. He tells me that that was his dog. That dog had died giving birth. We're still in the living room talking about what had just happened when the dog comes through the back door. Only this time, following the dog, are 5 little balls of white light at about puppy height. She walks over to us and the light balls follow. Needless to say, this blew my mind, and at that point, my friend had lost it, started crying. My buddy and I still talk about this, and believe it or not, he says that he's never seen any other kind of ghost in his life, and he never saw this one again. My buddy sent me a link to post this. I was a member of my church's Boy Scouts, and no, this isn't a story of me being touched. I really wish I didn't have to preface this, but sorry if I killed your anticipation. Actually, if you were secretly hoping I was about to tell you a story about that, stop reading and get out of here, you sicko. Okay, now that all the pervs are gone. When I was in 3rd grade, the pack that I was in was called the Bear Scouts. Our den consisted of 7 boys, other 3rd graders who attended my church. Our badges were themed to our name's likeness. Already earning 2 of them, I was eager to obtain my 3rd, the Bare Necessities badge. Our pack leader scheduled an overnight camping trip with the troop. The pack leader was named Jojo. He was someone who had earned first-class honors within our pack. Along with him was a teenager working for his Eagle badge. 2 very capable people kept a consistent, vigilant eye over us, and I still managed to get lost for almost 24 hours. I was lost within the first hour of arriving at our destination. Instead of learning how to build a fire, my fellow Bear Scouts spent the day and night combing the forest for me. I don't think anyone earned anything towards any badge that trip. There's not a search and rescue badge, and even if there was, they didn't find me. Thankfully, a hiker's dog found me the following morning. What's crazy is that when my troop returned home, they never informed my family of the real incident. I don't know if that was their attempt to cover it up or what, but they left a nice write-up for my parents saying that I had run away, intentionally abandoning the pack. That's not exactly how it happened, though, and I was never able to fully explain my side of the story. I can understand how, to a third party, it may have looked like I just ran headfirst deep into the woods, but they apparently didn't see what I was chasing. So, here's my story. Miles of driving in a cramped church van led us to the thickets of Yellowstone National Park, a part that's reserved for events like this. We all jumped out of the van and went into our respective directions, eager to use nature's restroom. After I shook off, I heard one of the boys call my name. The voice sounded like it came from in front of me. I waited a few seconds until I heard the same voice call out my name again. There was a tall bush directly in front of me that I had pushed my arms into and tried to spread apart to peer through. On the other side, I can see one of my fellow Bear Scouts. They're wearing a vest like mine, but facing away from me. They start moving their arms in a clock-like manner. They gesture for me to come over to that side. Before I can fully get through the bushes, the scout starts to jog further into the brush away from me, so I followed, assuming the rest of my pack was doing the same. As I pushed my way through the bushes, following the scout's lead, The forest seemed alive with whispers. I'm sure it was just the wind, but it felt intentional, like words could be found in it if you could just listen to it carefully enough. The voice calling my name grew louder, cutting through the whispers and silence. I quickened my pace to catch up with the scout, but as I ventured deeper into the woods, a strange unease started to replace that excitement I was feeling earlier. The trees loomed overhead, their branches intertwined, creating a dark canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air grew colder, and a faint mist began to creep along the forest floor. It was as if I had entered a different world by following this scout. Perhaps this was what he wanted to show me. An area untouched by man. But then I have to question, where was the scout? I called out to him, but my voice seemed to disappear into the eerie silence of the forest. And that's when I considered turning around and going back the way I'd come from. As I realized I had lost sight of the scout, I also realized I didn't recognize the area around me. Panic started to well up within me. Alone and disoriented, I stood still. My heart was pounding in my chest. That's when I heard it. Clear whispering. It was soft, haunting. It sounded like it came from all around me. My name was being whispered, over and over again. But the voice became distorted, unnatural. It sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. With no other choice, I tried to retrace my steps. But the forest, it seemed to twist and change. I was taught to identify markers on a trail or leave a trail of your own. I didn't do either of those things on my way in. I did know I needed to find my way back to real noise. I just needed to listen for the troop and follow their voices. But for whatever reason, I couldn't focus on anything other than the whispering around me. It was my name, followed by words I couldn't figure out, and then back to my name again. They grew louder. Despite me thinking I was running away from them, they echoed in my ears. Shadows moved around the trees. I could swear I saw glimpses of figures moving just beyond my line of sight. This place had become a maze. I knew I needed to get out. I mustered all my courage and just started running, blindly following the faintest glimmers of light that peeked through the dense foliage. The whispers, though louder, they were also more urgent with every step I took. I found myself screaming just to drown them out. I was also hoping my troop would hear my screams and investigate. As I'm running and screaming, everything goes white and then black. When I came to, I was sitting against a tree and it was dark. This was incredibly disorienting. Hadn't the day just started? Where was I? I couldn't move, but I didn't understand why. I laid there a minute trying to figure out what had happened. The last thing I could remember was running and screaming. Suddenly, I knew that I could move, so I attempted to stand up, only to realize I was going to throw up, and I did, everywhere. But then I felt much better. Sure, still stranded in the dark, but I saw light. It was in the distance, but I knew that I could make it to the light. After running in the dark for what felt like an eternity, the light didn't seem to be getting any closer, and once again, I found myself completely lost and helpless in the forest. It could have been the kid in me, but I was exhausted, and I just stopped moving, sat down, began to cry. And then I heard the whispers from earlier. I covered my ears, hoped my crying would drown them out, only they got closer again. I could now feel something around me, stalking me. Out of nowhere, I feel this pressure in my chest, almost as if someone is sitting on it. But I'm sitting up. There's no way for something to press against my chest. Still, it made it hard to move. I was crying, attempting to stop myself in order to get some deep breaths. And then, just like before, everything went white and then dark. This time, though, I opened my eyes to see faint sunlight. It was warm, and it made me almost forget about my situation. Then, I almost jumped out of my skin when I heard something running towards me. Snapped out of my sleepy state real quick. Back on my feet, I tried to move away from the sound, ducking behind a larger tree. From my new hiding spot, I realized the sound I heard, the thing running in the woods, was a dog. I don't move, but regardless, the dog spots me and starts in my direction. Then, for the first time in ages, I hear another human's voice. This one feels real. The dog was now sitting directly in front of me. The man's voice grew clearer. It sounded like he was saying Rudy over and over. The dog would bark when he did, and then look back at me and bark again, repeating this until the man reached us. He looks at me, clearly shocked to see me. He asks me if I'm the one separated from my group. I don't even bother explaining everything to the man, just answer his question and ask if he can help me find them. He agrees, saying that he knows exactly where they are and to just follow him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I burst out of the forest into the clearing where my group was. I looked around and realized the familiar faces of my fellow Bear Scouts. Jojo and the other troop leader are set further back, and they're talking to the police. Their expressions are all filled with concern. When they catch a glimpse of me, they almost do a double take. Everyone runs over to me and the hiker. Sighs of relief and a million questions start filling the space. Feeling overwhelmed, I just stood there. I didn't know how to answer anyone's questions. Where were you, or what happened? I felt like I didn't really know. They told me I'd been missing for hours, almost an entire 24. Then they said they'd been searching desperately for me, calling my name loudly, flashlights out and everything. The hiker explains where he found me, and Jojo says they searched there several times and found nothing. The first thing I ended up asking or saying was, "Did you hear my screams?" Everyone was quiet for a moment, and they said that they heard lots of things, but they never heard my voice out there. This was followed by people over-talking each other, but I heard one of my fellow scouts say, "You were following the boy, right?" I shook my head yes, but that was the end of that. As Jojo and the others recounted their efforts, I couldn't help but feel that they were leaving something out, something they couldn't explain either. How could they have been walking past and calling out to me for several hours and never have found me? Surely I didn't walk that far into the woods, but just as surely there was no boy in the woods besides me. I was sure that whatever I saw, whatever the other scouts saw, it wasn't a real boy. Does that mean I know what it was? Absolutely not. The incident was never spoken of again. The official story remained that I had run away from the pack on purpose with no purpose at all, other than to cause trouble, of course. But deep down, I knew the truth. I'd stumbled into an odd place in those woods. The experience sorta changed my perception of the woods, not really for the better, and I guess of whispering. They're both just really creepy to me now, and I definitely don't venture into the woods alone. Years ago, I became good friends with my neighbor across the street. We both had young children, and we spoke and or saw each other almost every day. Probably 6 years into our friendship, she developed leukemia and only lived one more year. She was 35. One day, I was looking out my front window, and I saw the car she used to drive pass by, turn around, and then it pulled up to the curb in front of her house and parked. I continued to watch, and I saw her husband and her 3 children get out of the car. The car was a light blue station wagon, one that she used to drive the kids around in, and her husband still had it. As I continued to watch, I saw her husband and the kids walk up to the front door of the house and go in. A moment or two later, I saw my friend get out of the car and walk to the door. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I knew for sure that it was her. I knew because when she got to the front door, she turned, looked at me, and waved. Then she, too, went into the house. I think she was telling me that everything was okay. I'll never forget that. At my old middle school, there was a man that had been teaching English since my mom went to the same middle school years before. His name was Mr. H. He was one of the 2 8th-grade English teachers at the school, and I was not placed in his class. I was disappointed because Mr. H was supposed to be one of the cool teachers. All the student body loved him. He was old, nearing his early 80s by the time I was there, but fit for his age. He didn't look a day over 50. On his face, though, he had 3 large, very predominant scars that ran down his face and over his left eye, which he had covered with an eye patch. During a summer vacation in the 70s, Mr. H went on a solo hiking trip in Orange County. He was attacked by a cougar. If it wasn't for its deteriorated condition, Mr. H probably wouldn't have been able to fight it off. The cougar took out his eye with a swipe from its big paw. Mr. H was forced to start swinging blindly with the machete he had. When the cougar was about to pounce again, Mr. H heard its legs dig into the gravel, and he knew which direction it was going to attack from. And with one Hail Mary home run swing, Mr. H made contact. The cat landed on him, sending both of them to the ground in a cloud of dust. The lifeless cat pinned Mr. H to the ground. He would then push the heavy creature off of him and walk back to civilization, injured and bloodied, before he could call for help. No cell phone days. When I told my mom the story, she was familiar with it, an alumni of the middle school herself. She was placed in his class for her 8th grade year. I was surprised to learn that. She'd never mentioned it before. I'd only heard from the older kids and some of their parents that Mr. H was the best. We didn't talk much more about it. Then, I was nearing the end of high school, and we got to reminiscing about things. I brought up that teacher with the crazy scar and eye patch. I couldn't remember his name. So, my mom says that she knew Mr. H before he had the scars, seeing him around when she was in 7th grade, and her 8th grade class was the first that he told the story to. Then, my mom says, that was a summer from hell. She tells me her best friend Jana was also attacked that summer, and as a result, the family moved away before the girls could start their school year together. On a late summer night, a radio station was having a contest, and Jana and my mom were listening to the broadcast. Jana was listening outside on her portable radio. She did this often as to not disturb the family by playing the radio in the house. Her plan, as she explained it to my mom through whispers over the phone, was to just run inside and use the phone if she knew the answer to the questions. My mom would also be listening to the radio, ready to answer the questions. This was a team effort. There were a series of questions, and in between them, they would have long musical breaks and advertisements. So while they waited for the DJs to come back on the airwaves, Jana decided to leave her gated patio deck and walked out to the front yard, where her and her mom were planting vegetables in a little garden. Although the patio had a little fence bordering it, the actual front yard did not. But the property line stretched far between the house and the street. The family had no animals, but that still made them feel more comfortable, having the sidewalk line be so far from the home. The neighborhood they lived in was also very safe, and what was about to happen was unheard of for that little residential neighborhood. While Jana is in the garden, she became distracted with the music and digging in the dirt with her small metal rake, when suddenly, the back of her shirt gets pulled with such lifting force that she goes from her hands and knees straight onto her back. Looking up, there's a man standing over her. staring at her through a paper bag mask with 2 holes ripped out for the eyes. Just as Jana is about to gather air in her lungs to scream, the man leans down, covering her mouth with his hand. He was wearing leather gloves, and the thick material began to smother her as he was trying to pick her up and take her to his car parked on the street. Jana still has a gardening rake in her hands, and using all the energy she has left, she thrusts it up through the paper bag mask, easily tearing into the material. The sharp prongs embedded themselves into the man's skin, deep enough for the rake to almost be pulled from her hand when the man dropped her back down. But as she fell back down into the grass, she held a tight grip on the handle of the rake, and it dragged down the man's entire face, shredding the mask and his flesh as he turned to run away. She never saw what he looked like, and she had no description for the police when she called to report the crime. The only evidence she had to prove her story was a shredded paper bag attached to a gardening rake and a vague description of the car. The incident traumatized Jana, and she didn't want to leave her house for the rest of the summer. My mom would always have to go to her house and hang out with her inside, with the few times they got to hang out before Jana left. My mom says that she would recount the story over and over, trying to figure out some missing piece. She never did figure it out, just a painful memory that caused her to live in constant fear. After telling me the story, it's kind of quiet. I don't know what to say. It sounds horrible. Then my mom asks if I think that her story and my story share similarities. Mr. H was a smaller-built man. He was never extremely athletic, even in his youth when my mom attended school. Had he really fended off a 200-pound animal? Rumors began spreading around school that he hadn't traveled to Orange County that summer. Kids that weren't in his class telling other kids they'd spotted him around town sometime over the summer. Those stories could have easily been fabricated for attention, and many kids didn't buy into them. But as my mom would gaze at the side of his head while he spoke in class, the scratches were still in the beginning stages of healing when school had started. My mom said they looked pretty identical to what the slashings of a gardening tool could have been. She remained suspicious, and I mean she remained suspicious for a very long time, without my knowledge. My mom had called the school and specifically asked for me not to be in Mr. H's class. This being a touchy thing, and knowing that I'd see the guy every day, that he was well liked, my mom didn't share all of this until I was in high school. While I was there, he outlasted any staff that had suspicions of where he'd gotten his injuries on his face that summer, and he was able to fully lean into his story for years. But what do you think? Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining, whether it's your first time or you're a regular. Your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos, and of course, double features. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons whom we appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, and Adrienne. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me. amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, the Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.